Alright, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to my presentation. Uh, Before we begin, I'd like to clarify that this is going to be completely unscripted, so anything that I say or do, I may end up going off on a major tangent, so please bear with me while we get through this. If you have any questions, feel free to just shoot them out. I will be more than happy to respond, as long as it pertains to answering all questions about Yesod before the boss even comes out on global. That's right. Thank you very much. I will be answering all questions about this boss. Every single one. And by the end of this presentation, you will have no questions about Yesod. So, with that out of the way, I'd like to say thank you all for coming. Let's start with a FAQ. Who is Yesod? Now, this is a pretty important question. Before we start talking about anything about this boss, we need to understand what our enemy is. And to put it simply, it's this guy. All important question afterwards. Why? Why is Yesod? And after knowing your enemy, we have to understand our enemy. And that can be done very simply by reading the story. Now, most bosses in this game, it's a fair question to ask, why are we fighting this boss? Perodzilla and Gauze, even Shirokuro all come to mind as bosses that the game's pretty cryptic on why we're fighting. This one, not so much. There's a very good reason as to why, and you will find out if you read. So, if this is a burning question of yours, it can be answered with enough time and patience. So, last of the frequently asked questions, how is Yesod? I think this is a pretty kind and meaningful question, so he's doing good. Thanks for asking. With the frequently asked questions out of the way, we can begin talking about Total Assault Yesod. He'll be coming sometime next month, from the time of this recording and presentation. So we'll begin small. We'll talk about the differences in difficulties, and as we continue, we'll be examining screenshots from ShallowDB as well as the fight itself to show each of the mechanics and go a little more in depth on them. So first, from normal to extreme, the boss is completely mechanically identical. The only differences that will happen from difficulty to difficulty is just increases in its stats, its HP, and attack specifically. Things get real from Insane onward. A lot more mechanics get added to Insane, and it only gets more and more difficult going into Torment, because there's some tweaks to certain skills that make it far less forgiving. Lunatic is actually identical to Torment, the only difference being an increase in HP and attack, usually needing additional teams to shave off that extra HP. So, with that all being said, let's get into the fight. As soon as you load into the fight, immediately greeted with this.
Looks like a Nintendo Switch arm.
You're so right, his arms are kind of like springs. The astute might notice something a little bit different already, but as soon as you're loaded into the game, you're already being meted with some new mechanics. First off, every single character on the field gets Sonic effectiveness up. So what this means is you can bring characters who are off color and still do very reasonable amounts of damage. Hi, editing Zing here. I just want to point out that what I just said is completely wrong, and you should not pay attention to that. Sonic effectiveness up only affects students that do sonic damage, and it also only affects sonic damage on elastic armor. This is true for all effectiveness up buffs, so off-color students will not receive any benefit from this sonic effectiveness up buff. One of my friends actually corrects me on this later on in this video during the team building section. So more on that later, but basically you can still bring off-color students, but they will not get the bonus from the sonic effectiveness up. They will only do neutral damage. That is all. Notably though, special students are not included in this, so you can't bring like Karin or Satsuki to this fight and expect them to get the sonic effectiveness up. It is only students who take the field or bring something onto the field. Like Utaha, her turrets will get the sonic effectiveness up. Iroha, if you summon her to the field, she gets the sonic effectiveness up. But any students who do not go onto the field won't get it. Now, reading a little further, there's something called analysis level. That is a new mechanic unique to phase 1 of Yesod. And if you look to the bottom left corner, that is it right there. That is a meter showing your analysis level. This is a very important mechanic for this fight because as you gain more analysis level, you get buffs, and these buffs are critical for dealing any meaningful damage to this boss. Notably, you only get the buffs when the meter is filled out and maxed at 5, so you don't really need to worry too much about it. It is all about just maxing out that meter and then reaping the rewards from it. All the way at the bottom, it talks about at what points the analysis level will like reset and go away. We'll get more into that later, but he does continually reset it. So this phase is very much so about gaining an analysis level, making the most of it, and then rinse and repeating it. Notably, on Torment and above, there's actually a tweak to this where the buffs are stronger. Now, I did say that Torment has mechanics that make it a little more difficult on the previous slide. This is the one case where that is not true. This increase in buff is mostly to offset the massive jump in HP that he gets going from Insane to Torment. So functionally it ends up being very similar to its previous version, but you get a much more effective buff on Torment and Lunatic. Moving on, within the first couple seconds of this fight, before you even reach the boss and start firing auto attacks, he does this attack. It is a laser beam from his eye that blows up the whole arena. You have to survive this hit. It does a lot of damage. It is very deceiving how much damage it does, and you have to survive it, and he does it semi-frequently. This is basically the equivalent of like his auto attacks towards tanks. This is the only attack he does that isn't described in any skills. This is just a massive hit that he does, and he does it very frequently, specifically after every single one of his EX skills. I'll show that off a little bit later, but this is important because from Insane onward, he gets red damage. So any red armor students that you bring will get melted by this attack in particular. If your students can't survive this, you will not be able to even start the fight. So, go ahead. Yeah, he does this before the fight even starts. Well, the moment it starts. So you genuinely have to survive this. This is the first big check you will ever encounter in this fight. So please keep this in mind. You need to survive this attack. yeah, as
Is
mentioned,
there like a crit molding for this? Like boss crit molding?
I'm glad you asked because we're gonna get into that.
Oh.
So, after you survive the first big hit that he does, you start doing auto attacks, and then the field starts to look like this. What is going on? This is another skill he does, where he summons 6 lanterns, 3 red, 3 blue, and when it is destroyed, it does a percentile damage. Anyone who's done Tiferet will recognize a similar mechanic. Now, the next part of this skill is that if any ally destroys 2 or more of these lanterns within 2 seconds, a ton of bad stuff happens. Namely, a massive reduction in cost recovery and a complete stun for 10 seconds. If this happens, you might as well reset. It is very, very bad. This particular screenshot is from Insane. The reason I'm using this is because it is a very slight tweak from like Extreme, where the only difference is instead of Yesod and Phase 2 Yesod being 99% reduction, Phase 1 is a 95% reduction. This is just easier to keep in mind. He reduces incoming damage by a massive amount, so the big challenge with this fight is doing any meaningful damage to him at all, much like Hod, actually. On Torment, this is where things get a little more interesting. We get a new status called Cost Recovery Stop, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. If it wasn't doomed before, if this happens to you, you have to reset. You will not be able to do anything in this fight if 2 or more lanterns are destroyed by a single ally in 2 seconds. The astute will notice something strange above one of the lanterns. That's the mark of Eschaton. If you've played Monster Hunter World and you know about Elatrian, that is the same word. But I digress. What this mark does is that whichever lantern it's above, when you hit that lantern, it will reset your analysis level down to 1. In practice, all this means is this is just the lantern that you have to destroy first. I forgot if I mentioned, but this is a mechanic that only appears on Insane onward. So, personally, I actually think this makes it easier because you will always be able to tell which lantern you should start with. But moving on, I know some of you might be concerned about that whole if any ally destroys 2 or more lanterns within 2 seconds bit. There's not really much need to worry about it because most skills that you'll be using to destroy these lanterns are longer in and of themselves than the window that you need to destroy them. Mika's skill takes 4 seconds to cast. Swimsuit Hanako's skill takes 3.8 seconds to cast. Now, the reason why that is even a clause to begin with is so that you don't destroy all of these lanterns all at once with a big AoE skill. So, if you end up hitting more than one and destroying more than one in one single EX, then all of the debuffs happen and it's pretty bad. So, once again, just to reiterate, you don't have to worry about the timing with the lanterns. Your students' skills have enough delay inherently to where you don't have to worry too much about it. Just make sure you don't hit them with AoE skills. You can still use Hanako as long as you make sure you're only targeting one lantern at a time. Otherwise, this mechanic isn't too difficult to deal with. So,
Covered why some lanterns are red and some are blue?
not yet, and that's what we're gonna get to right now. Yeah, what's up?
So when the fight starts, everyone gets blown up.
Yep.
Do we need to, is healing required, or do you just tank everything and that's it?
Good question. That will depend on the comp and the difficulty that you're challenging, but generally, with a lot of the mechanics involved in this fight, you will need some form of healing or mitigation, so shielding. So usually you'll be bringing some form of healer, but we will actually talk about team building a little bit later. So, good question.
And there's no debuff to healing in this fight, right?
No, there is no debuff to healing in this fight. So right after he spawns the lanterns, he does this glowing eye thing. This is a marker of his first EX skill, Purification by Force. Oh, I should mention that all of the skill names are subject to change when the official translation comes out, so don't put too much stock in the names right now. But this skill is Purification by Force Red. He glows red, and afterwards he'll begin to raise its right hand and then slam it down, dealing unsurvivable amounts of damage. So the way you get around that is when he slams the ground, you want the opposite color, this color being blue for this particular skill. When the ground is blue, it'll be blocked, and instead he'll start doing damage over time to your enemy, well, to your allies. But in exchange, you get a massive increase to your cost recovery, meaning you'll be able to fire skills very rapidly during this 20-second window. So how do you deal with that? How do you make the ground blue in the first place to deal with this EX skill? That's where you destroy the lanterns. So the blue lanterns is Azure Glowing Lantern. What it does is when you destroy one, it increases your analysis level, does a bit of damage to everybody, reduces the EX skill cost of the character that destroyed it, and gives you some skill cost in exchange. After that, the ground turns the color that you destroyed, and there's a couple things here. If the ground is red when you destroy a blue lantern, the ground becomes neutral. If the ground is neutral, it becomes blue. If the ground is already blue, it does a buttload of damage to you. So you're probably picking up already the sort of rhythm that this fight is going to be asking of you. You're going to want to be alternating between blue and red lanterns in order to get to the analysis level that you want, as well as the color of floor that you want. And the marks on top of the lanterns might give a little bit of a reason to consider the order that you do that in, but otherwise it is rather straightforward here. Talking about the red lanterns, it does pretty much the opposite of what the blue lanterns do. The function is mostly identical, but if the floor is blue, it removes that color. If the floor is neutral, it makes it red, and if the floor is already red, it does a ton of damage to you. Otherwise, they're functionally identical.
Are the lantern spawns fixed, or are they random?
The lanterns will always be red on the right side, blue on the left side, but the marks that appear on them are always randomized.
Okay.
So I don't know if this is something that is coded into the fight, because I haven't seen any examples in any of the successful clear videos I've seen. But if this is possible, that the mark can appear on, in the example I had originally, Yesod did the red EX skill, and for that you wanted the floor to be blue, and the mark appeared on a blue lantern. That is an ideal situation, and I don't know if it is hard coded for that to happen, but if it's possible that the mark appears on the opposite color that you want, then instead of doing alternating at the start, you would do like in the example that we just had, we do red because the mark appeared on a red lantern. We do red, blue, and then we do blue, red, blue instead of a more simple alternating. What this does is it allows you to deal with the mark mechanic but also end with a blue floor, because you start with red and then you cancel it with blue and then you start back with blue, cancel it with red, finish on blue. Again, if you want a red floor, you just do the opposite of that. Do blue, red, red, blue, red.
So the slap only, he only does the slap at the end.
Yes. There's a certain amount of time that you have. He will very slowly raise his arm, and once the arm is all the way up, you'll want the floor that you have. So you have generally ample time to solve this mechanic, but it is something to bear in mind that the marks do add a bit of a wrinkle into the plan. But if everything is successful, then you'll end up with a situation like this, where Yesod has raised his arm all the way up, but you've solved the mechanic. There, you have 5 analysis level, and the floor is blue. So, what happens next? He swings his fist down, but it gets blocked, and during this time, he is stunned. He does nothing for the next 20 seconds. This is a burst window, and a very important burst window, because you have your analysis level up, you have the cost recovery increase. This is where you do all of your meaningful damage to this boss, because he does take far less damage than a vast majority of bosses. This is where all of the buffs come in and offset that damage reduction, and you are able to do meaningful damage to him. Alright, at the end of the 20 seconds, he breaks out of his stun and does the auto attack that you were greeted with at the start of this fight. You will want to have healed yourself up in preparation for this, because he does do damage over time during that burst window. So you want to make sure that you are incorporating healing into your rotation while doing your burst damage, in order to keep everyone topped up and alive to survive this hit, because surviving this hit is crucial. This is where the most damage that is done in a single instance will be done during phase 1. So again, make sure to survive this hit. If you survived it at the start, you'll likely be able to survive it again, but keeping topped up on your health is crucial for phase 1. Now, next thing, yeah, what's up?
How much damage do you take when you break a lantern the same color as the ground? Is it significant?
Yes, so, hi again, editing Zing here. I've returned because in the original video I kind of explained this poorly and I was stumbling over my words because I didn't have the stats on hand at the time. But now that I'm in post, I think I can explain it a bit better. So, what this mechanic describes is that initially when you destroy one of the lanterns and the floor comes out, it does 15% of its stat, so its attack stat. So it does that as damage over time, and when you hit a second lantern of the same color, then it does 100% of its stat as damage over time for 10 seconds. So what this means is that looking at this stat block from the lanterns on Insane, and both the blue and red have identical stats, Looking at this, you will be going from 15% of its attack stat to 100% of its attack stat, meaning the damage changes drastically. So do not hit more than one of the same color in a row, otherwise you're going to be taking enormous amounts of damage, and in a lot of cases it's just not worth it. Just do the mechanic as intended.
Can you destroy more than 5 lanterns?
Yes, you can destroy all 6, and that will come into play for a later mechanic. Now, I should mention that this fight is completely scripted, so he will always do red first, and second, he'll do Purification by Force blue. It is functionally identical to the first EX skill he did, just instead of wanting a blue floor, you want a red floor, and he raises his left hand now. But you may notice something a little bit different from the first time. That's because we have another mark on Insane and above. This mark is called Mark of Prophecy, and what it does is it essentially prevents you from gaining any more of analysis level. So it is a terrible idea to attack that one first. Instead, what you'll end up doing is attacking that one last, so that it solves the mechanic and you no longer have to worry about the whole no longer increasing any further. Now, just like mentioned before with the Mark of Eschaton, I don't know if this mark can appear on the other color, the other color being the color that you don't need to solve the mechanic at any given point. So in this example, he's doing EX blue, so you want a red floor. If the mark appeared on a blue lantern, all you would have to do is just not hit that lantern. You could solve the mechanic as is normal, you'd alternate, and the last lantern alive would be the one with the mark on it. Since it's red in this example, the last mark is, the one with the mark is just the last lantern you destroy. Alright, and if everything is solved properly, you destroy the marked lantern last, and the floor is red. Just in time for, once again, the attack to get blocked, and you'll go through the same stun phase burst window that you went through on the first EX skill. Make sure to stay topped up. You will do that same laser beam attack once he gets out of his stun once again. Now, after you solve Purification by Force red and blue, his chest opens up and we have to deal with Rebuilt Foundation. This is a slightly different EX where only if the ground is not illuminated does the skill get blocked. So this is where destroying all 6 lanterns come into play. Because you want to survive this attack, the only way to get to 5 analysis level and have a neutral floor would be to destroy all 6 lanterns. And you will not be able to go up to analysis level 6, unfortunately, but you will be able to still destroy all 6 lanterns, no problem. You will have a neutral floor, and this attack gets blocked. That is it for phase 1. You just rinse and repeat, solving the red, blue, neutral attacks, and as long as you have enough survivability and are able to dish out good damage during the burst window, phase 1 is solved.
If you do phase 1 with multiple teams, does the game remember where you left off? Or does it reset back to blue, red, middle?
Great question. It does reset. So you will always start the fight when he does the red beam that raises his right hand. So the floor you want will be blue at the start, always. This is a scripted fight, so it is always going to be the floor you want is blue, red, neutral. The colors he does is red, blue, neutral, but it's easier to think in terms of like what floor you want. So you want a blue floor at the start, you want a red floor second, you want a neutral floor third, and you just repeat that all the way until phase 1 is solved.
Is that New Year Haruka?
That is New Year Haruka. I'm glad our resident Haruka fan noticed. Now, let's move on to phase 2. Yeah, what's up?
So you said the fight is scripted, so I'm assuming it just loops between the 3 different EXs until the fight is over, right?
Yes.
There's also a number of times it'll keep going,
There is no set number of times, and
like how long the fight actually is for each.
yes, if you are able to solve all 3 of those EXs, you will be able to do the entire fight. It is only a matter of time.
It just boils down to how strong your first window is, basically.
Yes. In the end, this is a type of boss that you would be able to throw bodies at, as long as you have students who are able to destroy the lanterns in time. That is the most important part, because destroying the lanterns is what allows you to survive. And on the highest difficulties, I'm using screenshots from Lunatic Clears. On these highest difficulties, the damage is very high, so survivability becomes even more important. But if you are able to solve these mechanics, just remembering blue floor, red floor, and neutral floor, you will be able to deal with this entire phase, no problem. Doesn't matter how many teams it takes. Now, let's go into phase 2. Phase 2 looks quite different from phase 1. It has some visual similarities, but functionally and mechanically, it could not be more different. So, using the screenshot, this is what you're greeted with the moment you enter phase 2. And we'll dissect this one by one, starting with this in the bottom left. So, what Arona is telling you is that some support drones have arrived to help you deal with this phase, and help you they certainly do. These things are strong. They are each tied to each individual character in your formation. So the character on the farthest right will enter on in your formation screen, enters on the farthest left, and that is the support drone that they are tied to. Every buff that you apply to your students gets transferred to the support drone that they are tied to. So you essentially copy the buffs that you apply, and it also goes on to the drones. The drones are super strong, and they deal even more damage when attacking enemies that have the focus fire debuff, or focused assault debuff. Now, to get an idea of how strong they are, this is their stat line on Insane. The important thing to notice is that they have 20,000 attack. Now, this is their stat line on Torment. It is over double the amount of attack. They have 50,000 attack. And this is their stat line on Lunatic. They have 100,000 attack. What this means is that the higher the difficulty you challenge, the stronger these support drones are, and the more important it becomes to engage with the support drones as a mechanic, because they become significantly stronger the harder the fight is. Now, back to this, let's examine another aspect of this arena. Yesod's hand himself. Now, this is his stat line on Insane, and it's pretty tanky. There's a lot to deal with. He doesn't take very much damage in general because of that previous passive we discussed, where they take 99% reduced damage. But this is a stat line on Torment, and a key difference is that he has a massive crit damage resistance now, compared to on Insane. And a little thing I'd like to highlight is that his defense is actually enormous as well. So on Torment, you're not going to be doing a lot of crit damage, and he has a lot of inherent defense, so defense down will be very valuable, and crit damage becomes less valuable. Now I'd like to turn your attention to this side of the field. These two pillars, the pillars of power. These things cannot be targeted and are invincible, so don't worry about dealing damage to them. They are sort of their own thing. They start at 0 HP and constantly recover their own HP, but when they hit 50%, then you're able to engage with the mechanics. However, if you let it reach to max HP, then a lot of damage gets dealt to your students and you get reduced cost recovery. If that happens, I just recommend resetting, because it is not very fun to deal with that type of thing. But when they have 50% HP, you can inflict 3 seconds of CC, and it'll completely empty out its HP bar, and it'll give your support drones a damage dealt increase. So keep in mind that you don't want their HP to get too high, but you need it to go above 50% in order to get the buff. On Torment, on Insane and above, the CC duration that you need to fill up those pillars increases to 5 seconds. It's not a massive difference, but it is a bit of a check to make sure that you have students that with AoE CC that have been invested in. So it's not a massive difference. The biggest difference is that ShellADB had a spelling error and to put pillars of Pillar of Power, but I expect that to be changed when the official translations come out. Now, turning your attention to the right side of the arena, these are the pillars of foundation. You need to destroy these. Destroying them allows you to actually do meaningful damage to Yesod's right hand. And from normal to extreme, this is what they say. It takes 900% increased damage from EX skills. That sounds wonderful. That sounds really easy to clear out these pillars. Except on Insane and above, that's not a thing anymore. So goodbye massive damage increase on EX skills. You have to whittle them down like a normal person. Now, something I'd like to turn your attention to on top of that is their stat line. On Insane, they have 6 million HP and the same massive defense that Yesod's right hand himself has. So without the EX damage buff, you're expected to have to engage more with the support drone mechanic to do more meaningful damage, because you're not getting that massive buff on EX skills anymore. You can still do EX damage, of course, but it will be a lot less meaningful, and you will still have to do debuffs and buffs in general to deal damage to these pillars, and you have to do the damage to these pillars in order to do damage to Yesod. Yeah, I wanted to highlight the fact that it has a ridiculous amount of HP, and it only gets higher the higher the difficulty is. This is just its insane stat line. If you want to have an idea of its stat line on Torment, it has 18 million HP on Torment, and I'll spare you the pain of finding out what it is on Lunatic.
Is there any timing, or you just straight up kill both of them as fast as you can and you're set?
Kill both of them as fast as you can, because the faster you destroy both of those pillars, the faster the increased damage debuff goes onto Yesod, the faster you'll be able to defeat his right hand that is in your path. Now, something I'd like to turn your attention to is this first pillar. When you enter the fight, your students will automatically start auto-attacking this pillar. Same with the support drones. So it is easiest to start focusing down this pillar first. In the screenshot, we have Noah, who has applied Focus Assault onto this pillar in order to both reduce its defense, because that aspect is also on her EX, but also to allow the support drones to do double damage to that pillar in particular. Now, next we have the pillars of power that have gone above 50%, so we have Saki coming in to do some CC onto those pillars. And thumbs up, that means the mechanic has been solved. The support drones get their damage dealt increase debuff. Things seem to be going fine so far. More damage is being dealt, and oh, the ATG is filled. Wonder what that could mean. When his ATG is maxed, he does a little slam with his left hand, and it does a meager 200% damage. Surely this is survivable. No. This does a ridiculous amount of damage, but it is the only damage that is dealt to your students throughout the entire phase. The ATG charges rather quickly, so you will have to deal with this attack semi-frequently. But if you can survive this attack, you can survive the entire raid. You just have to make sure you have a source of healing that will allow you to go back up to full, or you have a shielder that is able to fully shield the attack for your students. If you can survive this with full HP, you are set for this entire fight. It is only a matter of time, once again. So,
Just want to say, if you can survive these 12 ways that your students can die, then you're set. That's what it sounds like to me.
this is one and only one way that your student can die. But it does feel that way, because the ATG does charge rather quickly. So you are expected to, after this hit, you are expected to heal back up to full, or have already shielded before the attack lands, and if that's able to be done, then that is the only damage that you'll have to deal with. So, assuming you survive that attack and are able to heal up before the next hit, you'll wear down both of the pillars, and then Yesod himself starts taking a lot of damage. And then you get a little animation of the ship that you're trying to reach during the second phase, and didn't seem too bad. You just had to remember to CC the left side of the arena, focus fire on the right side of the arena, then focus on Yesod's hand itself. So if only it were that simple. You have to do it twice. Now, there is a window of forgiveness. Like every boss fight, when you've changed phases, there's a checkpoint, but there's another checkpoint after you defeat the hand for the first time. So if you run out of room time, or you are forced to retreat for some reason, you will start back at this point, the second point of the fight, but you have to start the mechanics all over again. The pillars get respawned, so you have to do the destroying the pillars on the right side all over again. You have to start from scratch with the damage dealt buffs that you'd get from the CC pillars, but if you can do it once, you can do it a second time. Surely.
Is that the little text on above the HP bar multiplier?
Yes, this is his second time. So when you load into the fight after defeating the first hand, you will always be greeted with the second time that his hand has appeared. Otherwise, it is functionally the same. You just have to do it twice. The ATG will fill up once again. It'll do the same amount of damage that it did last time. There is no functional difference between part 1 and part 2 of phase 2. So, assuming you're able to defeat the second hand, you actually make it to the vessel this time, and you get a really cool animation. So the raid is done. Now, let's go over a quick summary of the fight, just to review and summarize the mechanics in more plain terms, because a lot of technical terms got thrown out because there's a lot of mechanics. So, on phase 1, what you have to do is survive the initial blast, because that attack will happen a lot, and if you can't survive it initially, it will be very difficult for you for the rest of the fight. The idea is to destroy the lanterns in alternating order, and you have to make sure that you get the color that you want. It is static, it is scripted, so you always want a blue floor, a red floor, and then a neutral floor, or a blank floor. And it will repeat until the phase is over. There is no extra curveballs throughout the fight. It is always the same script. Now, in this screenshot in particular, I wanted to point out that the Mark of Prophecy has appeared during the start of the fight. What mark appears is entirely random, and where it appears is also entirely random, but I'm unsure of if you have to worry about it appearing in a spot you don't want, but there are contingencies to deal with that. You just have to slightly tweak the order that you destroy everything in. Right? So the two symbols, the two marks that will appear is the refresh symbol and the X symbol. If you see the refresh symbol, you want to destroy that lantern first. You see the X symbol, you want to destroy that lantern last. This is pretty straightforward, and I actually think makes the fight a little bit easier on Insane and above compared to Extreme. Now, after you block the attack using the right color floor, you have 20 seconds, and during that 20 seconds you have to burst as much damage as you can. This is where all of the meaningful damage in this fight for phase 1 will be done. So make sure that you're always staying topped up. It'll be pretty difficult to brute force on higher difficulties because you're going to be having to deal with a lot of damage over time, and he doesn't take very much damage, so you'll end up taking a lot of damage over time because you're in the fight for a while. In phase 2, make sure to focus on destroying the pillars on the right side with either EX skills on Extreme or below, or with the Focus Assault debuff and your support drones on Insane and above. Make sure to apply AoE CC to the pillars of power. when their HP is above 50%. Oh, I skipped a little bit, but remember that the buffs that you apply to your students also apply to the support drones, and the support drones do way more damage the more difficult the fight is, and the higher the difficulty. Something I neglected to mention a little bit earlier, the support drones cannot do critical damage, so all of their attacks cannot crit. So any crit buffs that you may apply to your students, while they'll get applied to the support drones, because they can't crit, it won't really affect the support drones, but it will still affect your students. The last thing to remember is the ATG. You either shield before the ATG is filled, or you heal after the hand comes down and damages your students. Defense down is very valuable because he has a massive defense stat. So bring some defense down, bring some good buffs, make sure to destroy the right pillars, CC the left pillars. You'll be able to do a lot of damage and make it to the end. So, now that we have an understanding of the fight, let's talk a little bit of team building real quick.
Sure, doesn't seem too complicated, but I think if you went into this fight blind, you would just get your shit rocked.
Yeah, that is the big thing about this fight, is it's all mechanics. If you don't know what the mechanics are, you won't know the first thing about the boss. You won't understand why you're not dealing any damage. You won't understand why the boss is one-shotting you. But when you do understand the mechanics, there's a very clear rhythm to it. Phase 1, destroy the lanterns in alternating order and end with the type of floor you want. Phase 2, deal with the right pillars, CC the left pillars. Buff your allies, which buffs the support drones, and you'll succeed. So let's talk team building. Phase 1 and 2 are very different. Yeah, what's up?
Do you need to heal the support drones too?
No, you do not.
Oh, they don't take damage?
They do not take damage.
Oh, that's helpful.
So why are our students risking their lives if these drones can just do everything?
Well, if we refer to an earlier question in the frequently asked question, why is Yesod? The answer that was there should answer your question. Phase 1 and 2 are very different mechanically. Because of that, I suggest, and most people who know what they're getting into with this fight would suggest, bring at least 2 different teams. The mechanics are very different, so bring 2 teams that can focus on each of their separate mechanics. On Extreme and below, you may be able to get away with 1 team for the whole fight. This is because it's a lot more forgiving, and the only difference is just increases in HP, so if your characters are strong enough, you'll likely be able to do the whole fight with 1 team, but he has a lot of mechanics and a lot of inherent damage resistance, so it'll be very difficult to brute force the raid the higher the difficulty you go. So let's talk team building for phase 1. You want 1 to 2 DPSs because you need characters that will be able to make quick work of the lanterns. You'll want at least 1 healer or shielder, and you'll want at least 1 buffer or debuffer for your burst window. All of those aspects of the fight are very important, so you'll need each of these types of students to solve each of those aspects of the fight. Here's some examples. For DPS, we have Wakamo, we have Mika swimsuit, Nagisa, Renge, Eri, Hanako swimsuit, and Neru uniform. The astute have noticed that Wakamo and Neru do not do purple damage, but mentioned all the way at the start, all of your strikers get sonic effectiveness up. So you can bring off-color students and they will still contribute meaningful damage, especially if they are as strong as Wakamo and Neru uniform.
I thought that sonic effectiveness only helps you if you deal purple damage, and if you don't, then it does nothing.
Wait, am I dumb? It might be. Hang on. You might be right. You might be right about that. We will return to that. I think you're right. Thank you for correcting me. Now, that doesn't change things for Wakamo. That does slightly change things for Neru, but both of those students are still very strong and will be dealing neutral damage even if they don't get the benefits from sonic effectiveness up. So, you win some, you lose some. They are still strong, but they will probably be less effective than Mika, Nagisa, Renge, Eri, Hanako, except for Wakamo's case, and we'll actually talk about Wakamo's case a little bit later on. Now, let's talk about some healers and shielders. On the healer side of things, Mari Idol, Kokona, they are the best here for single target healing. Atsuko, Natsu Band, and Reisa Magical will be very good options for AoE healing. As far as shielders go, Kaede and Yuka Track will be very good for AoE shielding. Mari will be excelling at single target shielding. As far as the buffers and debuffers go, it's usually the usual suspects here. You have Kisaki, Ryo, Hoshino Swimsuit, Nagisa Swimsuit, both Seiyas, and Reisa Magical, who will be upcoming just before this fight releases. As far as debuffers go, though, we have Haruka New Year and Shiroko Swimsuit. Mainly Haruka New Year. This is a bit of a surprising thing that some might notice, but Haruka New Year is actually quite useful for Phase 1. The major reason being that on Torment and above, Yesod takes significantly reduced crit damage in general, but Haruka can reduce character's inherent crit damage resistance, so she ends up contributing rather meaningfully with her debuff, especially since Mika Swimsuit does guaranteed crits. So there's a bit of synergy there that is a bit surprising to some, but to others may be a very happy thing. Now, Shiroko Swimsuit here has an asterisk next to her because on Phase 1, Yesod doesn't have a very high defense stat. So you aren't necessarily going to be bringing her for the debuff aspect that she's going to be bringing to the table. You'll mostly be bringing her for just the quick start that you're able to achieve with her, as well as her cost regen sub-skill, and her general high stats, leading to make her a very useful stat stick. Let's look at some example teams real quick. This is a team that you'll probably see a lot, and with maybe minor variations here and there, depending on composition and whatnot, but this sort of team is something I like to consider a high sustain team. You have a strong source of single target healing for any emergencies. You have AoE healing. Sometimes that can be substituted with AoE shielding. You have a very strong buffer with Kisaki. You have students who will be able to deal with the lanterns in Mika and Hanako, and you have students for the burst window, Kisaki, Wakamo, Mika. This sort of team is a team I like to consider a fast cycle team. This team, you'll be doing a lot of EXs thanks to the cost recovery that you get from Hoshino, as well as the cost recovery you end up getting during the burst window. Everyone else here has relatively cheap skills, so you'll be copying a lot with Ryo on both Neru and Mika, and you'll be debuffing the boss with Haruka, you'll be healing everyone with Kokona, and buffing everyone further with Hoshino. Now this is an interesting sort of comp because there's only one DPS student here. I consider this a 1 DPS hypercarry sort of comp, where unlike the other comps, this one relies heavily on Mika in her rapid fire stance to clear out all of the lanterns. So you have Seiya reducing her cost, you have Nagisa making it easier to cast more skills because of cost overload, and then you have buffs from Seiya's swimsuit and Himari, and then just to top it off, you have Atsuko in charge of keeping everyone alive. Now, this team is an example of a team without swimsuit Mika. Instead of Mika, we have Nagisa in that sort of main DPS role. We're using Kaede as a shielder, we have Kokona as a healer, we have Neru as a second student to deal with the lanterns, and we have Wakamo to work alongside Nagisa for the burst window. Shiroko is there to speed everything up and provide stats. So let's talk about Wakamo real quick.
Of course, you have your own.
This is an important slide, not just because Wakamo is one of my favorite students, but rather she has light armor. So she has light armor, she doesn't do sonic damage. Why bring her? Well, this strawman that I made up, don't ask that question about Wakamo, you can bring her wherever you want, but as for the real reason why you will be seeing Wakamo on lots and lots of comps and guides is because of her EX skill. This skill is in a very unique position for this boss because this boss is uniquely weak to this type of damage because he doesn't take very much damage in general, but what he ends up doing is massively buffing your students' attacks, which their attack stat, which accumulation directly scales with, and because dealing damage to him is difficult in general, during your burst window, when you cast this skill, you will effectively be able to copy a lot of the damage that you're doing to him during that burst window and apply it again. So a very strong Wakamo for this fight makes the fight in general go by a lot faster on phase 1 because he has a low HP but a lot of damage resistance, but he buffs her attack massively and she doesn't care about his inherent damage resistance. All she cares about is how much damage her team is doing. She's heavily reliant on her team, and if your team is able to do a lot of damage during the burst window, she will take whatever damage that is and just do it again. So it makes her very valuable for this raid in particular, even with the risk of her dying very easily. due to her red armor. Now, the risk, of course, comes with the fact that she has red armor, so you need very high investment in order for her to survive in the first place, and then the higher investment you have in her, the more damage she'll be able to copy, the more damage you'll be doing with her. So it is a strat that requires a lot of investment. It may not be accessible to everybody, but it is very potent, and you will be seeing her show up in all sorts of speedrun clears as well as guide clears for Yesod. Before I get into phase 2, any questions?
Yes. How high investment do you need?
Great question. That will depend on the difficulty. I can't give you exact numbers, but the yeah, the higher the better. I know a fully maxed out Wakamo with Bond 50 on both alts and like UE 60 and whatever. Fully maxed out will survive Lunatic, no problem. Which means there's wiggle room for lower difficulties. And Torment, you won't need fully like everything maxed out, but you will need enough for her to survive. What enough exactly is, I can't give exact numbers for exact investment for, but if she can survive the first hit, she's good enough. Because that first hit is going to do the most damage to her immediately. If she dies immediately, you won't be able to use her. If she survives, you'll be able to heal her, and she will be taking a lot of damage because of having the wrong armor type, so she will have to be sort of babysit a little bit, but the payoff for the damage that you will be dealing with her during the burst window tends to be worth it for a lot of players that are going to be challenging this at higher levels.
Same question for the 2 magical students we're getting. Will they be viable at 4 stars? Probably not Suzumi, right? Because she's the DPS.
Good question. They are viable at 4 stars. Suzumi has very good like duration on her skill to begin with. It will be more forgiving if she's UE 40, but I'll actually get into that because she will appear on phase 2 team building. Because with phase 2, what you want is at least one student who can focus fire. You will need multiple if you're doing multiple teams, but you only need one on each team. You'll want one student who can inflict AoE CC for each of your teams. You'll want at least 2 buffers slash debuffers. You can have 1 buffer, 1 debuffer. You can have 2 buffers. You can have multiple debuffers. The comp doesn't exactly matter, and you can have more buffers than just 2, but you will want at least 2 because there's a lot of aspects to his stats in general that you'll want to be buffing and debuffing in order to do meaningful damage quick enough to actually make good progress. You will want 1 healer or shielder. You will not need to bring both unless the damage is far too much for you. Ideally, you won't need to bring both, because if you bring one, then you shouldn't need the other, but if you bring both, you'll be losing that slot for... that could be more buffs or more damage. And if your slots aren't already full, you can fill up your remaining slots with students that have strong auto attacks. Now, here are some examples. There are only 4 students that have focus fire on their EX skill, and that is Noah, Izuna swimsuit, Ichika swimsuit, Sakurako. There's one more who applies Focus Fire, and that is Cherino, but that is on her basic skill, and it only comes out every 40 seconds. It is not very reliable for this fight, and you will be wanting to apply Focus Fire far more frequently, because the damage that you gain from it is too much to ignore when especially challenging higher difficulties. As far as options that you have for the CC aspect of this fight, Saki, as we saw in the examples earlier, we have Tsubaki, who is great here, Rabu, who will be the welfare unit coming with the upcoming Magical Girl event, Kyoko and base Suzumi will be also good budget options to deal with the CC aspect. Now buffers. The buffers here are going to be somewhat different than usual. There's going to be a lot of focus on attack speed as well as regular attack increases. So Mio does very good attack speed buffs for the whole party. Magical Suzumi, she does attack up and a new skill called Basics Proficiency up. So that makes her uniquely valuable for this phase. Mimori does great attack speed up. Reisa Magical does a lot of attack up. Causes of Band does attack speed up. Akko Dress, she does crit damage up and crit up. I mentioned earlier that bringing crit damage and crit up won't really impact the support drones because they can't crit. That is because Akko Dress is uniquely suited to buffing Rabu. And we'll see an example team shortly. Kotama is just a general good budget buffer that you can bring to this fight. As for debuffers though, Hoshino Armed, she does great work with her sub-skill. It is very useful to bring her because it is able to stack with other debuff skills. So it's nice to bring Hoshino Armed. Fuyu, recently released, she does very strong defense down. Shiroko Swimsuit, unlike in phase 1, here you'll be making great use of her debuff if you decide to bring her, because she has defense down on her EX, and as I will keep hammering in, he has a really high defense. I believe 4th highest in the game as far as bosses go. Let me think. Peroro, Bina, Kurokage, give it 5th. 5th highest. So bring defense down, you will not regret it. As far as healers and shielders go, you'll want AoE healing. Ideally, 1 instance of AoE healing, because the ATG does come rather quickly. You will want to guarantee that your students are healed up rather than having to wait for it, but you still can bring AoE healing, like AoE healing over time. But Haruna Track is a good source of like 1 instance of AoE healing. Shigure Hot Spring, she is healing over time, but she has a very useful sub-skill that is crit damage up, so your regular students, not the support drones, will be dealing extra damage. Reisa Magical, she's appeared so much because she can do everything. She can heal and she can buff, and that makes her extra valuable here as well. She can heal. She does do healing over time, but you'll be summoning her rather frequently for just the buff in general, so you will likely be topped up at all times if you're using Reisa Magical. Hanago is a good budget pick. She does do healing over time, but it is uniquely faster than most other sources of healing over time in the game. So in a pinch, you can definitely bring Hanako, especially if you already have her invested. Some shielders would be, you could track Amy swimsuit, Shizuko swimsuit. I didn't mention bringing Amy and Shizuko on phase 1. That is because here they will be able to excel a lot more. And that's mostly due to their sub skills, buffing everybody. The buffs are far nicer on this part of the fight, where on phase 1 you want more specific targeted buffs that will help with your main DPS do damage during the burst window. This is more sustained damage over time with auto attacks, so the approach is a little different. You'll want to bring different students to achieve that sort of buffing situation. Let's look at some examples. Instead of showing each individual type, I want to point out that all of these teams, despite having very different compositions, manage to achieve the exact same results. All of them have some source of focus assault. All of them have some source of defense down. All of them have some source of buffing. All of them have some source of CC. The method that you go with doesn't particularly matter as long as you're able to achieve all of the checks on the checklist. If you're able to do that, you'll likely be able to succeed in this fight. So you have lots of options. They don't particularly do anything very different from each other. There's a lot of freedom with the way you can choose to approach phase 2. So let's talk about the magical girls, because they will be releasing just before this boss and are uniquely situated to deal with the mechanics of this fight. Now, Suzumi is highly specialized for phase 2. She purely buffs, that is her main thing. She is a support who buffs AoE. So she specializes with AoE attack buffs, and she increases cost recovery, and she has basics proficiency. You can read exactly what it does, but it just increases damage that is non-EX. So very, very helpful with buffing the support drones in particular.
Isn't she gonna be amazing for set?
Yes. She is, this type of buff is very useful for set. I don't remember her armor type off the top of my head, but if her armor type is the right type, then she would be. If it's the wrong type, no. She has blue armor, which resists set, so yes, she is very uniquely situated for set as well. Now, Reisa is in a bit of a different spot compared to Suzumi. Suzumi is a much more specialized student, where Reisa can kind of do everything. This lets her be used in both phase 1 or phase 2. She can do healing, she can do buffing, and she does have her own damage that she does as well. So she is very useful, she's very flexible, but she also falls into that same jack of all trades, master of none situation where, yeah, you can slot her in anywhere, but she may not excel in all of her given roles. But she does compress a lot of roles, so because she does a lot of things all at once, you may be able to bring her and free up another slot for more buffs or more damage. Depends on where you're bringing her, but she is a very flexible character. So that leads to the question, should you pull for either Suzumi and or Reisa? Any veteran will tell you it depends. If you've played this game long enough, you will know that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to if you should pull any given character. What matters is after seeing all of the mechanics, after seeing potential examples for what sort of things you're looking for in the team building aspect, you would know what you might be missing with your specific roster. And if you are missing something that these students will fix and you want to pull for them to solve that niche and have more success on this fight, more power to you. If you're the type of player who just pulls because they're limited, because they are limited, then you don't even have to worry about whether or not they will contribute anything to any fight. You're going to be pulling for them because you either like them or because they're limited. So it depends. Just be responsible with your pyroxene and make sure that you go into answering the question of should you pull for them with an informed mind about what you in particular can do. So, in conclusion, this is very mechanically heavy for a Total Assault boss. If anything, I'd say it's a lot more reminiscent of a Final Restriction boss, with the layers of mechanics and the challenge being directly tied to solving those mechanics rather than being able to be brute forced like a lot of older bosses. So a lot of the students that are good for this fight will also be very new. A lot of the Wild Hunt students, the Fest students that just recently came, the magical girls, so that can make it a lot less accessible for a lot of players as well if you weren't already planning on tackling this boss and pulling for the students that are specifically good for this. But because we now have a better understanding of the rhythm of this fight and the mechanics involved in it, you should be able to plan a lot better with the tools that you have and figure out what it is you might still need, because that'll also inform who you might borrow. There's a lot of options for borrows on this fight because there's a lot of mechanics to this fight. So any holds that you might have, you could borrow, and if a borrow doesn't solve it, you might need to invest or pull. And if you can't, you know, gold still looks better anyway. So I hope you all have a good luck with this upcoming fight, and I hope that this little TED Talk will have helped at least a little bit. Thank you for your time.